Like literally.
Like literally, yes,
Yeah.
sir. So let me just say that this is the chapter now where now we start
Hmm.
to disagree.
Okay.
But let me say this, that for those listening, I don't want to come off as, I don't know, kind of screwy. I want to come off as very I guess logical in my approach. So just a few things to be said before I dive
Mhm.
into um my interpretations of the text. Number one, the theory of knowledge that I'm working from is coherence. So all I'm trying to do is show
Mhm.
that the Bible as a whole text is coherent, that it
Mhm.
makes sense, um, it's consistent. Now that's not to say, and I do want to make this disclaimer to those listening, especially skeptics, um, that this does not mean that it's true. I'll give you an example. The Nazis, when they were fighting the Soviets, they had this
Mhm.
elite group. The Nazis had this elite fighting force. I think they were called like the Sixth Army or something like that. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but they were like the most elite fighting force. And Hitler had sent them to capture, I think, Stalingrad.
Mhm.
However, the Soviets deceived them because what they did was they built like a fake fighting force, and they built a fake like a fake supply depot,
Mhm.
and a fake, like the whole thing was just a fake to
Mhm.
just fake them out, making them think they're gonna attack from here, they're
Mhm.
gonna do this, they're gonna do that, but the actual army went around.
Mhm.
You see what I mean? So their beliefs, the Nazis' beliefs were consistent. Oh, there's a supply depot, there's this group. So what they're gonna do here is they're gonna outflank us. But the
Mhm.
whole thing was a lie. It was a
Mhm.
deception. So now this theory of knowledge that I'm presenting doesn't necessarily mean that everything that happened is true. All I'm presenting is that the text is consistent, and
Mhm.
I'm not gonna pull any rabbits out of hats and say,
Gotcha.
this is metaphorical or this is this. I'm just gonna, just as Jesus, Jesus when he debated with the Pharisees,
Right.
he's kind of just giving them scripture.
Right.
He's like, this is what the scriptures say.
And so just to be clear,
Yeah.
you're doing the very thing that I'm doing. I'm not arguing against the truthfulness or falseness of Genesis
Oh.
1 and 2 here. I'm arguing for their coherence with internal coherence and with
Hmm.
reality.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so, not with reality, with the external world. And so, to argue whether or not something is coherent, like you said, is not to say whether or not it's true or false. Does the story hold up on its own merit?
Yes.
You could do the same thing with, Lord of the Rings, right? You can talk about whether or not the story is coherent on its
Yes.
own terms without talking about whether or not it's true.
Yes. That
So
is a
I
better
appreciate that
example.
that's what you're doing here, because some people just went to this and tried to argue me down that I'm saying it can't be true because of what I'm
Yeah.
saying. And that's a different discussion.
Yeah. And I think just to be clear and to finish off my thought on that, I don't subscribe to the coherence theory of truth necessarily,
Mhm.
but I do think that it has its uses. In this
Right.
case, it's very useful.
Yeah.
Um, but at any rate,
Mhm.
so should we dive into issue
Yep.
number one?
Sure.
Okay, so issue number one is daylight before the sun. Um, so let me go ahead. Here's what I'll do, because you give like Hugh Ross's explanations,
Mhm.
and however, I'm more in line with C. John Collins. But before we get
Mhm.
to C. John Collins, can I give you my, I guess, my answer to the question, which
Sure.
is which
Well,
is
you want to
stated.
state the question for those who are
Yeah,
listening? Yeah.
yeah. So in the beginning, yeah, let me actually crack open the Bible. And yeah, just for the record, I'm gonna be citing a lot of verses from the Bible.
Mhm.
So if people are listening, they might want to pull out their Bible. Um, but yeah, so Genesis 1 through 3 says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So there's light. However, um, it says in verse 14, on the fourth day, evening and morning, it says, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let there be for seasons, for days, for years. I'm reading from the King James, by the way.
Okay.
It says, let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. So here we have the creation of the sun, the moon, and the stars. But in verse 3, on the first day, God creates light. So the question is, how is there light without there being a sun
Hmm.
yet? Is that?
And I think it's important to say, for context, when we say
Yeah.
God created light, it's
Oh, oh, oh,
specifically it's
sure.
specifically daylight.
Okay, so I was gonna get to, because I agree with
Okay.
C. John Collins. I don't agree.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say he
Okay.
creates light there. Yeah, but I'll
Gotcha.
get to that in a second.
Hmm.
Okay, so I guess where I would start off resolving the issue
Hmm.
is I'm gonna jump now to Revelation
Okay.
22:5.
Yeah.
And if you want, you can read it. That way I'm not
Uh,
talking too much.
this is God being the light of the city, right?
Yes. Yes.
Let me get there real quick. Yeah, this is I didn't put this one in the book for a reason. I'll
Yeah,
tell
no
you why.
problem. No problem. No problem.
A lot of people say, "Why didn't you consider that option?"
Yeah.
And let me see. You said it's Revelation what?
22:5.
Okay. Um, Let me start at verse 3. This is
Yeah,
the
sure.
new city, the new heavenly city, or it's earthly, right? It's new earth.
Yeah.
No longer will there be any accursed, but the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it. This is the new city. And his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And the night will be no more. They will need no light or lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever.
Yes.
Mhm.
Um, this also corresponds with the prophet Isaiah
Mm.
in chapter 60, verse 19. I'll go ahead and read that. It says, the sun shall be no more thy light by day, neither for brightness shall the moon give light unto thee, but the Lord shall be unto thee an everlasting light, and thy God thy glory. Um, so it's clear that there is, from God's nature, a light that comes. Sorry, I have a couple of verses here.
Mhm.
Actually, like 3 or 4. Um, the book of Psalms 84:11. I'll read it really fast, but it says, "For the Lord God is a sun and a shield." Actually, that's it. It's just, I mean, it keeps going, but the main point is that it says the Lord God is a sun.
Mhm.
Now, given the revelation by Isaiah and in the book of Revelation, it seems clear that God, by his nature, and again, this is just revealed theology, but his nature is such that he emits light. Given that that is a case, would you allow for the possibility that the light could be emitted by God himself?
I like that theologically. I like
Sure,
that theologically.
sure.
And what I say in the forward is what theology does is it comes along and it helps us answer some of the troubling issues we find in the text. And I think
Okay.
that's a theological answer. I think it's a good theological answer. I don't think there's
Yeah.
anything wrong with that theologically. But when we talk about the coherence test of truth, um, it's one thing to look for coherence between Genesis and Revelation because you're looking at the Bible as an entire book.
Hmm.
I'm looking at coherence in the text that we're dealing with. So, what would the author of Genesis have been thinking about? What
Oh,
would the community that's receiving that text, who didn't have Isaiah, who didn't have Revelation, what would that community have understood? How were creation accounts, you know, created, invented, or written? Creation narratives. What purpose did they serve in the ancient Near East and the creation of light in that society?
okay. But
So, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, would you be open to the possibility that they wouldn't know about this mystery yet? Let me give you an example. Let me give
Hmm.
you an example. Um, take the Messiah.
Hmm.
A lot of people didn't know what to expect. Now they knew that something was gonna arrive. Well,
Hmm.
yeah, go ahead. You look like you want to
Well,
say
we
something.
could stay right in Genesis with what the example you're searching for, the Trinity. There are people who want to see "Let us make man." They want to see the Trinity in that passage, and they would say the original people receiving that text would not have known about a Trinity. But there's this thing called progressive revelation, where the receiving people receiving the text would not have known what later generations would find out because God hadn't revealed that yet. He revealed these things progressively. So just like the Trinity could be the "let us," and they wouldn't have known back then, in the same way, God could be the light and they wouldn't have known back then.
I would subscribe to that theory because to me, I'm telling you from not
Mhm,
from an ancient Israelite perspective because I don't know, but when I first read through the scripture, I
mhm.
told you right that I read through the Bible for the first time when I was
Yep.
27,
Mhm,
and I remember reading certain passages in the Old Testament and thinking, I really sure I understand that. And later on, when I'm reading in books like Revelation, I'm like, oh, because
mhm,
for example, I'll give you
mhm,
I'll give you one case in point that just literally came to my head right now. Um, I believe, and I don't know if I can find it. Yes, Revelation 12:9. I'll go ahead and read it. It says, "The great dragon was cast out,
mhm,
that old serpent called
mhm,
the devil and Satan,
mhm,
which deceiveth the whole world." And so it says right there, right? That
mhm,
old serpent. So
mhm.
it's like making reference to Genesis. And I'm like, okay, that's clear indication that that serpent is the devil because it doesn't say that in
Right.
Genesis 3.
It doesn't
It
say that in
just
Genesis, and no ancient Israelite thought that.
exactly. And
Mhm.
that's why I would subscribe to the theory because I had that personal experience just reading through the
Right.
text where I said to myself, I'm not sure if I understand this,
Mhm.
but later on it became clear.
Right.
Even the prophets, um, like early in Exodus,
Yeah.
you have the elders eating with the Lord, right? And they're looking up and they see like a very like a lot of lights and like a rainbow. It's like a rainbow, like kind of that's when the elders are eating with the Lord, and it's like Moses, Aaron, and the elders of Israel, and then it's like Ezekiel, and he sees like a fuller revelation of that because they're just looking at the feet, and
Mhm.
Ezekiel's like, nah, I saw the whole throne, and it's like, okay, so I would agree with that. I would agree with that. But do you accept that
I
though?
don't, and here's why.
Okay.
Well, because there are so many other issues that I have that just makes this like another straw on the camel's back. But
Okay.
here's what I don't like about that is how does a later author
Hmm.
get to go back and tell a prior author, here's what you meant? Now, you can do that for your current community. Here's how we're going to take it. But I think it's an intrusion. It's a literary intrusion upon someone's work. Like if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I rewrote your song. Here's what you meant." And I'm like, "I didn't mean that at all." You can take it that way. You can take it that way if you want.
Yeah.
But this is the point that Ambassador was making in the video. He accepts the idea of progressive revelation. He accepts the idea that there's one author standing behind all of scripture. I don't accept
Yes.
that. And so, you talked about the web of belief,
I
right?
see.
Because I don't
Okay.
see this one author standing behind all of scripture. I'm looking at what did this author mean? What did this author mean? And I'm very interested in knowing what the authors meant when they wrote what they wrote, as opposed to pouring some theological explanation that harmonizes or that, um, even spiritualizes things that they were not spiritualizing. I feel like it's doing violence to a text to do that. And I think there's a there's a motivation, a a religious affection based motivation to do that. And I don't, it feels, I don't know, I hate using this term because I get in trouble when I say it, but it feels dishonest to me to do that.
Mhm.
And I feel like I'm getting away from what the author was saying when I do that. So that's why, yeah, yeah,
Okay. So I guess my question to you is, who do you believe wrote Genesis?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't think we could ever know that.
Okay. Well, let me say this then. Because I don't want to necessarily, because I feel like maybe we've arrived at an impasse.
Hmm.
But I'm trying to see if I could extend this further. Because
Oh, let me add one more thing then before you
sure,
before
yeah.
you
Go
say
ahead.
that. Please don't forget what you're about to say there. Another reason why I don't like the God being the light of the city as a way to kind of import that back into Genesis 1 is
Mhm.
Genesis 1 is the separating, like the theme in Genesis 1 is creation by separation. And when you get to chapter 8, you'll see what I mean by that. How frequent the idea of separation happens in Genesis 1. That is the key to understanding what we call creation is really separation and forming. So for God to be the light in Genesis 1, verse 3,
Uh-huh.
God would have to be saying, let there be me. Like he's bringing something into being by separating it from something else. He separates light out from darkness. And so the question is, how, if God is separating light out from darkness to bring it into being,
Yeah.
how does he become the subject of that action?
Okay. Let me stop right there, because I think now
Mhm,
I'll come back to this, because
mhm,
we can come back to this in a second. But let me ask you a further question about Genesis, because let's say that you strip my ability to use Revelation or Isaiah
mm,
or whoever to understand the text in Genesis.
mm,
Um, then at that point, my question to you is, how to what do you make reference to when you're trying to make sense of Genesis? For example, I just made reference of Isaiah,
mm,
Revelation, Psalms. I was going to use Corinthians. However, if you strip that,
mm,
to what then do you make reference to make sense of the text? Now you might say, well, we got to look at, say, the culture of the day
mhm,
and see what the culture was like, how they thought.
mhm,
And my question would just be, how would we get, I don't know. I feel like we're trying to, I don't know. I guess that's just I'll just leave it at
mhm.
that. What would you make reference to?
Yeah, I think paying attention to how creation narratives work in ancient Near Eastern culture is your best bet, rather than going centuries later to figure out, what they thought about the sun or what they thought about. I think it's the literature of the time, the motifs, the cultural milieu. Um, because in a minute we're going to talk about, I would imagine, God creating a firmament or
Yeah.
dome. You know, like these are common themes in creation narratives. And so I think making reference to how those cultures understood the cosmology is probably your best bet to understand what the author of Genesis or authors of Genesis were doing there.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So we have a philosophical difference in the way we're approaching the
Okay.
the text. Yeah. So let me say this. Let me say this. Just to keep the conversation going. Uh, so for you then, you don't see the Bible as a connected whole. You think it's more of like this author meant something, this author meant something, uh the psalmist meant something else, and we'll put it together and we'll try to make sense of it. Or yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing that's what.
It's a little bit of both. I think it's a connected whole, but I think the connected whole comes as a result of um, redaction, editors, people who are stitching it together to tell the story that they want to tell. But in doing that, I don't think you can divorce, okay, but what was the storytelling before you got to it? So even if a later author does find a use for God is a sun and a shield, and you can tie that back into, hey, there was no sun at first in Genesis, because there are other things that are part of that connective whole, which I talk about. You have Psalms where people are asking, the psalmist is asking, do you know what the source of light is? Apparently, and other Old Testament scholars have said this, there's some evidence that they were not entirely sure that the ambient sunlight that we see in the sky is sunlight. They saw a difference between sunlight and daylight. So
Yeah,
when you see
I
I was like, when you see a bright blue
yeah.
sky, when you see a bright blue sky, but the sun is not in that section of the sky, it's very easy if you don't know cosmology, if you don't know what's happening in the heavens, to think that sunlight is one kind of light. Maybe that's where we get the warmth from. And then daylight is another kind of light. Like those, you see that. I quote, I forget what psalm it is, but you see that there where the psalmist is asking, do you know? Oh, I think it's God asking, as if mankind doesn't know. Do you know the source of light and darkness? Like you don't know where it comes from. That's something that
Mhm.
humans at one time, I don't know. They thought darkness had a source. So darkness was not the absence of light. They thought it had a source. They didn't know where it was. And light had a source. They didn't know where that was. Um, and so anyway, I just say that to say, I think I do see it as a connected whole, but I think there are things in the whole that tell you how to see each part. And I don't know.
Le-
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. I was just gonna say,
No, you
what
good.
about the way Jesus interacts with the Pharisees, because, or even the Sadducees,
Mhm,
because when they're debating, do you remember the Sadducees, right? They bring up this thought experiment to Jesus. They say, if a man is married with this woman,
mhm,
the man dies,
mhm.
and then her brother marries her and he dies,
No children
right?
from
Who's
one, no children from the
e-
next. Yeah.
exactly, and it's like, whose wife is she in the afterlife?
Mhm,
And Jesus goes back to actually, I can't remember what scripture he cited exactly, but he basically says, in the resurrection, people are like angels.
mhm,
Another case where he says to the Pharisees, like, yeah, what does the law of Moses say? What does the psalmist say here? I mean,
mhm.
you would have to render that whole entire conversation, or all of those conversations, as, I guess, you would have to say, well, Jesus didn't know what the authors of the psalm
No,
meant,
that's not
or
what I'm saying at all.
okay, okay.
Because I think it's very easy for later authors to pick up
Hmm.
earlier authors and build on their work. I don't have any issue with that. I'm just
Okay.
recognizing that there's building going on, and I'm looking at the stages of what was built on the foundational level and trying to understand, regardless of what the later author makes of the earlier author was doing his own thing, and I wanna respect what that was. I don't think the later author can tell us what the earlier author meant. The later author can only tell us what they understand the earlier author to be saying, and they may be right or wrong.
I guess, okay, so let me go back a step
Mhm,
and say, for example, uh in philosophy,
mhm,
if we say, let's reason together and try to figure out what God is like. Let's not make reference to the Bible. Let's not make reference to the Quran or to any holy book. Let's just think about what God would be like, what God should be like. We make that distinction. We call that natural theology.
Mhm.
However, if we're going to say use the Bible to figure out the nature of God or any other holy text to figure out the nature of God, we would simply say that's revealed theology, because we can't know that apart from revelation. Um, Now, it seems to be, correct me if I'm wrong, um, that you're using a system of natural theology to get truths of what I would deem to be revealed theology. Because let me make it clear, because maybe that was too abstract. But maybe
No,
if
that's
I
hold
say,
on. Let me think about that because I like the way you worded that. Using
sure,
a system of natural theology to get truths about revealed theology.
yeah, because what we're doing here, or I guess what you would be doing here, is saying, let me use my reason to figure out what this text is trying to say. But the text itself is not necessarily revealed, because here's what I'm trying to gather, and I hope
Right.
I'm not putting any words in your mouth. But you take it as a starting point that the Bible itself is not divine. Or are you saying you're leaving open the possibility?
No, I don't see it as divine. So I don't even think I'm doing natural theology. I think if anything,
Okay.
I'm doing natural philosophy, not natural theology. But I'm taking a literary approach to the Bible that does not grant it
Mhm.
a status of being divinely revealed. And because I'm taking that approach, it's going to be almost impossible for me to have this idea of a divine, not almost, it is impossible for me to see a divine author behind it. But even if I did see a divine author behind it, I still think it would behoove me to ask the question, even if it gets stitched together later by progressive revelation, because even the revelator in Revelation 22, he's not saying this is what happened in the beginning with God being the light of the city, telling us what was happening in Genesis 1. We would have to infer that. And there's no law that says we can't infer that. I still think, as a theologian, not all Christian theologians do that. Some do, some don't see that as valid. So I think even the people that do see the Bible as divinely revealed don't go there with it because they just don't see that as plausible. Me not having the divine revelation as a starting point, I agree with them. I don't think that that's plausible. I think that what the author of Genesis is doing is talking about real daylight. And probably at that point when it was written, didn't know the source of daylight and had no problem seeing daylight being created before the sun because they were two separate sources of light. I
Okay.
just think that makes more sense than trying to make God an ambient light in Genesis 1 when he's separating himself out from darkness.
I guess to me, yeah, I guess I'm looking at it kind of opposite, because
Mhm,
if I'm just doing a read through of this text
mhm,
and I'm seeing that God says, let there be light,
mhm. And he
I don't know where that
separated the
light,
light from the darkness. What does that mean? And God saw the light was
yes.
good. God had to, so God is now passing a judgment on himself. Like, hey, I'm pretty good. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it doesn't it doesn't add up that he's talking about himself there.
But I see, I wouldn't, and this goes back to what you said earlier. I wrote it down, that God himself is the light. I think the light emanates from God. I don't think it necessarily is God.
Right, but he
But
still has to
he
evaluate himself or the light that emanates from him the
yeah, a
way he
property of
evaluates everything
himself.
else.
Yeah. Yeah, he's evaluating a property of himself and saying, this property of mine is good.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, let me say this. Let me say this, because I can't make sense of this text if this light
Hmm.
is not coming from somewhere that is consistent with the rest of the text.
I get you. I respect that.
Um, yeah, because I would just simply say, if you were to ask me, make sense of this, make sense of Genesis in isolation,
Hmm.
I would say I cannot.
Okay.
I would say I cannot. It's a task that I can't do. Um,
But when you
but
have the rest of the text to help you put it in a theological context,
yes,
answers
I
are
would
readily
have to.
available. Right.
Because let me say this, because
Hmm.
I had, and this goes back to my time in community college. I had a Jewish studies professor. Uh, he was a rabbi,
Hmm.
and I remember we were talking about the serpent in Genesis 3,
Hmm.
and he's like, yeah, later Christians say that it's the devil, but if you notice, it just says, right now, the serpent was more, came out of nowhere. It just says the serpent was more subtle,
Hmm.
and the serpent said unto the woman, and yada yada. And he goes,
Hmm.
later Christians said this was the devil, as
Hmm.
according to the New Testament scriptures, and so on and so forth. But we in the Jewish tradition, and the same thing in the book of Job,
Hmm.
when the accuser comes forth, it doesn't say it's Satan. It just says, or I believe maybe it does say it's Satan. I don't
Well,
know, but
it
it does
says
say
Satan was upon them, but the word Satan there just means the one who
the
stood
accused.
against, or the one who.
Yes.
I'll talk about this in chapter 9 of the book. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no, but his point was simple. He was just like saying, yeah, it's not clear, at least in the Genesis text,
Hmm.
who the serpent is. I mean, if you buy the Christian tradition, then yeah, it's the devil, but
Hmm.
in the Jewish tradition, we don't make that claim.
Hmm.
Um, so that's more akin to the Jewish tradition, which is to say, um, we have to make sense of a talking serpent in context with the ancient Near Eastern traditions,
Right.
the greater ancient Near Eastern traditions.
Hmm.
But here's the thing, Brady, that I was going to say. Don't you think that would be saying then that the New Testament, or sorry, not the New Testament, excuse me, the text in Genesis is kind of like, it's kind of part of this shared oral tradition that is not revealed by any supernatural means, but simply just a product of its time and a product of its day.
Yeah.
And we have to respect the text in isolation from the other texts. That is your position.
Yes, and I don't necessarily say in isolation. I just say on its own terms.
Okay.
And once you do that, then I think it's easier to understand what the redactors and editors were doing when they decided, hey, I like this part of this story. I like this part of this story. I'm going to use all that to tell our story. I think you can do all that and see it for the whole that it becomes, but uh, not to the obscuring of what it was before it ended up in that hole. And yeah, I think because of what comes next, I mean, after um, we talk about the light, and we talk about the dome in the sky. To me, that helps put the light in context. Like I could do that with the light, making it God, like in Revelation. I could do that if it wasn't followed up by more things that demonstrate the nature of this particular text. You know what I'm saying? Like your solution to me is elegant and it's fine, but then I realized, wait, this it's not just this one thing in this passage that needs a an explanation from outside. There are other things that here that paint me into a corner that says, oh, this is ancient Near Eastern literature. This is not the thing that I'm trying to make it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So let me say this. Let me say this. Um, the author of Genesis. Do you? I guess maybe, and I'll say this. Couple things. Let me say a couple of things. Number one, going off with that quote that I mentioned from C. John Collins, you say that another explanation. This is still on issue 1, where you say the section "Let there be lights."
Okay.
It's the C. John Collins one, C. John Collins paragraph. You say another explanation comes from Old Testament scholar C. John Collins, who thinks that neither verse 3 nor verse 14 is about the creation of lights. I would
Hmm.
agree,
Hmm.
because that corresponds with the text that I quoted earlier. It says, when describing the sun, the Hebrew term asa, made, is used and not the word bara, created. Collins take this to mean that the God is simply called forth, let there be a light from a source which already existed to serve as a dawning of day, and then to serve for signs and seasons. I would maybe not consent to that last part, but I would simply say, given the rest of the text, it would make sense to me that God's light himself, like God's own light, was used for the first, second, and third day, and that it wasn't necessarily created, but that it was commanded, as St. Paul mentions it in 2 Corinthians 4:6. He says, "Who commanded the light to come forth," but not created. So that would correspond, I guess, cohere
Hmm.
with the text as a whole, and that would be my full explanation of this. However,
Hmm.
given that I wouldn't be able to use that explanation in this case, let me ask you a separate question. The author of Genesis, same author as Exodus or different?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there are probably several authors in Genesis. Um, I don't know how much of documentary hypothesis I subscribe to, but I do think you see the strands of different literary traditions all throughout Genesis. So you've probably got several authors within Genesis, let alone by the time you get to Exodus. I have no idea of knowing. I don't think all of Genesis was written by one author, and then all of Exodus is written by another author, or they're both written by the same. I think you have different traditions, maybe different communities of authors. I mean, I I don't know.
So because
Yeah.
we can't get into the minds of, say, multiple
Hmm.
redactors from the past,
Hmm.
we are left with then just examining the culture, and that would be the greatest piece of evidence that we have of understanding the text by itself. That's your
I think
position.
so. Yeah.
Okay, let me say this. Let me raise another point then. Let's take for example. I'm trying to stay early. I'm trying to keep it to the earlier chapters of the Bible. That way, I don't want to go too
Mm.
far. Um, let's come with me to the Exodus, the part that I mentioned in Exodus. Remember when the elders are eating? It's actually 9:24, 9 through uh 18.
I'm going to read it.
Um, yeah, go for
I'll
it.
read it from the KJ. That's what you got, right?
Yeah.
Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel. I'm sorry. Then Moses went up, and Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of a sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in his clearness. Does yours say clearness?
Hmm.
Okay. Um, and upon the nobles of the children of Israel he laid not his hand. Also they saw God and did eat and drink. And the Lord said unto Moses, come up to me into the mount and be there, and I will give thee tables of stone and a law and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them.
Okay, actually, yeah. So it was just 9 through 11. It was just nine
Okay,
through eleven. That
gotcha.
was so. I guess let's take this text, just this text.
Hmm.
Now, if I was to read this, and remember, this is early in the scriptures, right? I'm reading this and I'm saying to myself, uh, they they ate with God, or they didn't, sorry, they didn't eat with God, but they ate
Mhm.
and they drank, and God was there. And they're looking, so that's what I meant to say, right? They're looking under his feet
Oh, okay, I get you
and they're
now.
seeing
I
like the
was like,
sapphire.
you mentioned rainbows, and I was like, "Well, this
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
like
yeah.
I don't know what this
Yeah.
is here." Okay, I got
But
you
you
now.
know what? I'm confusing. You know what? I confused because Ezekiel is saying the same
Oh,
thing,
okay, I forgot
but
you mentioned
now
Ezekiel.
he's
Yeah,
adding that.
got
Yeah,
you.
he's adding that.
Mhm,
Yeah. So I put Ezekiel into the text. So if I'm reading this and thinking to myself, okay, what is going on? Now,
mhm,
if I'm to, according to your framework,
mhm.
we would have to go into the ancient Near Eastern tradition and find some sort of
Parallel.
yes, I was going to say equivalence or some sort of parallel and say, where can we find this?
Not necessarily.
And I, okay,
Not necessarily.
elaborate on that.
Well, for one, I think if a text has unique features, or at least features that we
Y-
can't corroborate, then it just has unique
Yes.
features. And then you're forced to take it on its own terms and with no reference. But when it has cognate parallels, I think it would behoove you to understand the cultural milieu.
Okay. Let me say this. In the case that, for example, so if we read this right and we take it in isolation,
Hmm.
I guess my question, my straightforward question is, what, when you read something like this, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Um, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what is the author trying to communicate to the audience? What is the original author trying to communicate to the original audience? And it seems like the original author here is trying to communicate something about the otherness of God, or the glory of God, or there's something about God where he is other, and the
Mhm.
people are at his mercy and in need of what he is about to reveal. That's my immediate thought. In the Genesis 1 context, my immediate thought is, this author is trying to tell us. Oh, that's the other thing I left out. I say it in the book.
Sure.
The way that creation accounts work in the ancient Near East, what they're doing is they are explaining to you how the things that you can see came to be. And so it almost doesn't fit for a text to tell you how something came to be that no longer exists. So, God being the light, or a light emanating from God, if that's no longer the light that they're experiencing, it doesn't have a place in a creation narrative. Everything in that narrative are things that they can, it's part of their world. And they're trying to give their God the glory for the things that they see, not things that were once here but no longer exist. They still believed a dome was in the sky separating waters from waters. They still believe that there were kinds of animals. Everything that the author is talking about is, here's why we praise our God for the things that we see. And so when it comes to daylight, it was something that was still an experience of theirs, not something that was just for days 1 through 3, but no longer existed anymore. And so in that passage in what was that, Exodus we just read?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all relating people to their God. Here's how we relate to our God. Here's how God relates to us. I think Genesis 1 is the same thing. 1 verse 3. We relate to the God who made the daylight that we now benefit from. Not a different daylight, the daylight that we now get.
But I see that as a bit problematic, only in the sense that if for example, if
Mhm,
Genesis 1 was something like, let's praise God highest in the heavens for the light he created, I would agree. I'd be like, yeah, I mean that's, but it's giving you a specific order of creation.
mhm,
It's giving specific details as to when he created what.
mhm,
Uh I see this as more don't get me wrong, I do see elements of, I mean, there's obviously indications of what's good
Hmm.
and what is not. Day two, it doesn't say what is good, but uh, the point being that it's revealing, I don't know, to me, it's like revealing something about his nature and revealing something about what he created,
Hmm.
why, and in what order, which doesn't necessarily fit the explanation of this is how we relate to our God and let's give him praise. You know what I mean?
Well, I
Like,
think it fits in this sense. Why are we worshiping this God? He's the
mhm,
maker of heaven and earth, right? Like how we relate to him is we submit to him because he's the one who made the things that we now benefit from. Uh, if we can't give our God credit for creation, then our God is not God, because their God, our neighbor's culture, their God claims to have made a dome in the sky and have made and separated the waters and made the sunlight and made their God claims that. So if our God can't claim that, then why are we worshiping him? Why are we trusting him to get us out of to help us with our, our enemies and to provide? We've got to give our God some kind of track record in order for us to have a reason to worship him. So I do think it's not just about the nature of God, though it is that. Our God is omnipotent because he can do all this, right? Um,
mhm,
our God is one. Our God is not the sun. Our God is not the waters. Our God is not. Our God is separate from all that. It's telling you about the
mhm.
nature of God, but it's also telling you here's what our God did.
Can I ask you, because you would know the answer to this? I don't.
Mm.
Um, is there an equivalent creation narrative that gives, I guess, like a similar order of
Yes.
creation?
Yes.
Okay. Could you
Yeah, you'll get to it in chapter 7.
oh, okay. Okay, then I guess we can save that
Yep.
conversation for later then. Okay. Um so let me go ahead and ask this question. Cuz this is, I guess,
I'm sorry, chapter 7 and 8. 7 and 8 deal with that.
okay. Um yeah, so let me go ahead and say this, because I guess our epistemic foundations
Mm.
are very different. Um and so it makes, let me ask you, let me just ask you a question, which is, and I guess here's my question. Trying to pick the right words. Would you allow for the possibility? Now, I'm not saying believe it, but
Hmm.
just the possibility. Because what I was going to do when I showed you that Exodus passage is link it to the passage in Ezekiel.
Hmm.
Now, do you believe that whoever wrote Ezekiel had to be familiar with that passage in Exodus, or and are just saying, yeah, let's build on this passage because I like what it's going down here. It's showing how great our God is. Let's expound on it further in Ezekiel. Or would you allow for the possibility that maybe this guy was a real prophet and just saw the same things that the elders of Israel saw?
Yeah, I don't have any room
You
in my
okay?
worldview for that. Like I'm robbed of that when I see so much of the biblical text. I see the human fingerprints there that I can't get there. I
You
can't get
can't
there
get
anymore.
past documentary hypothesis, kind of multiple source theory.
Um, I can't get past just how unrealistic the depictions of the creation of the heavens and the earth are. That allows me to accept things like, you know, you know. So one of the other issues in chapter 3 um, is the creation order, the two different creation accounts and all that kind of like it's not just the internal lack of coherence, it's the fact that there is not coherence with the external world that makes me say I'm almost open to all kinds of hypotheses, not just documentary. Like somebody help explain why the text looks this way. And one of the things that I can't embrace is because of a divine reason. I just can't see that.
Okay, let's go back a bit. Let's go back
Mhm.
even further then, because we already have a difference there. Let me go back a bit further, and let me ask you this. I'm gonna ask you the same question that my friends asked me when I was in
Mhm.
in school, which is, do you believe at least, yeah, do you believe that a God exists?
I don't.
Okay, all
I,
right.
and it's
I
not that I believe a God doesn't exist. I don't have a reason to believe that a God exists. I think that God was an ancient hypothesis. I would agree with anybody that says, but there must be some explanation for this. I don't think we know what that is. I think a God is an ancient hypothesis that I don't have any reason to put any stock in at this point. I think we ought to keep trying to figure out what the cause is. And I can't rule a God out. I just have no reason to believe in one.
well, the reason I say this, Brady, is because you mentioned how to you, um, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I
Mm.
guess fanciful. I guess it's kind of fanciful. You just said it like a couple minutes ago. Just like the claims that the Bible's making are too out there, I guess is what you're trying to say. I'm just using the word fanciful. However, um, take take evolutionary theory,
Hmm.
and you tie the reason I don't want to get into evolution today is because you have
Right.
a whole chapter on that. But it seems to be that, for example, when I studied evolutionary theory, there was never an explanation for why. It was just more of how.
Hmm.
So I remember watching this video on evolution a while back, and it was, giving the breakdown, like this is how it started. And right from the very beginning, it shows like Earth as this really kind of, I don't know, like there's like eruptions, and there's this singular cell in the water, and the narrator's like, this is the beginning of life. But in my head, I'm thinking, hold up,
Mm.
how did we get there?
Right.
And all Genesis is doing is saying, hey, listen, God did it. Now, it doesn't obviously get into the crazy in-depth detail as to how, but
But it does.
it
He
okay.
speaks. He speaks, and these things happen instantly.
Correct. I guess what I was trying to say is,
Or he
um
forms a man from the dust of the ground. Like it gives you the how.
yes.
Mhm.
So yeah, it does give us the how. um I guess what I'm trying to say is, if someone can believe in something like evolutionary theory, which doesn't propose a why,
Mhm.
it seems to be that there's not too much of a logical jump in saying, okay, now we have a why, because that's all Genesis is really doing. To me, I don't know, the way I
I guess
read
my,
it.
my question though is, but why should I believe that why is really why? What reason do I have to believe that? I may want to believe it. I know some atheists
Well,
who wish that they could still believe the Bible. They want to believe it. But why I guess why so speak about why. Why should I believe it is
it's
the question.
sure, yeah, because it's, I mean, just both of us together, right? We can't even
Mhm.
get past verse 1 because this is in the beginning God.
Mm.
And so if your theory is, well, I don't believe in God, now this is going to become, I guess, kind of an impasse. But let me say this. Let me poke
Well,
your brain a
no,
bit.
could you answer that question? Because to me, it's not just I don't believe in God. Like,
Oh yeah, sure. What was the
my
question?
my
Sorry.
my question is, why should I believe in this God?
Okay, why should you believe in God?
And this God in particular.
Okay. So you want like my
Yeah, I mean,
my reasoning?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me say this. I
Well, let me
take Pascal.
clarify the question too, because you
Sure.
said if all Genesis is doing is giving us a why, it doesn't seem like that too big of a leap. If science is trying their hardest to give us a how, but doesn't even claim to give us a why, then why not accept this why? You're asking why not, and I'm asking why should I accept this
hmm
why?
hmm I mean, that's one thing to say. Yeah. So it's one thing to say. I guess is to be more specific. Are you saying why this particular deity as described and revealed in the Bible, and
Right,
not why some
because you
other?
no, yeah, because you asked, it seems like a not too big of a jump to science gives us the how, this can give us the why. Why not embrace it?
I see. I guess what I was referring to was um in context to what you had said earlier, which
Mm,
is I find this to be unbelievable, or some of the
mhm,
claims to be, whatever, fanciful or outlandish, and I just simply say, well, I don't,
mm,
because I don't see there being necessarily too big of a leap from, say, something like, which again I didn't want to get into, but like evolutionary theory, which says here's how
mhm,
everything came to be from our origin, the origin of species, but doesn't propose a why,
mhm.
because it doesn't say why.
Oh, so you're not
Um,
saying just let the Bible fill in the gap that science has not yet filled in. You're not saying that.
no, all I'm saying is the believability. I'm talking about the
Right.
believability, because you say that a
Well,
lot of the claims in Genesis are unbelievable, or
well,
I don't want to
because
say unbelievable, but
I did say that. Well,
okay.
my main point is it doesn't cohere with what we know about reality. But the thing about what we're finding in the sciences is that these things can be demonstrated. There's reason to believe it. If you ask me why somebody who used to not believe in evolution believes it, I can give you reasons why. When it comes to what you're asking me about the Bible, my reasons for why are simply because there's no, not only is there no way to demonstrate that it's true, there are ways to demonstrate that it's not true unless you take it figuratively. And so I'm asking, I don't see why I would believe it in that condition. I can tell you why I would believe what we're learning in the sciences. Things can be demonstrated. What can be demonstrated from what we're reading in Genesis that would make me say, and that's why I believe it.
Okay, I think that's a good segue into, if you want to know my theory of truth, right?
Sure.
Correspondence theory,
Hmm.
which is straightforward.
Hmm.
If somebody says, "Hey, there's a tree with green leaves right
Right.
there," and I look and there's a tree with green leaves, and it corresponds to my reality, my
Hmm.
external world, it's
Right.
true.
Right.
Um,
And I'm sorry,
Now,
I was saying the same thing when I use coherence. I kept saying external coherence as a way to talk about correspondence. If what
mhm.
you're saying in this text corresponds to external reality, there's the external coherence there. But same thing for me. Yeah.
Mhm. But here's the thing. I think that the Bible is making two different kinds of claims.
Hmm.
So there's one claim about the natural world that we see around us, how it came to be, how it came to exist. And then there's another claim of a supernatural realm, that is
Hmm.
a world of spirits, the world of yeah, like spirit beings, angels and stuff. So there's no way we can verify the latter, just by nature of, like for example, if you said to me, prove to me that God made the lying spirits go to the prophets and lie, I would just simply shrug my shoulders and say I believe it because the text says it.
Hmm.
There's no other way I could know that. But if God says, two flesh become one and whatever, that I can see with my own eyes. Like, yeah, okay, married couple, they have a baby, they have whatever. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that there are two different kinds of claims. And I feel like, if, for example, in Genesis 1:3, there is a claim being made about a metaphysical reality, namely God and the light he's emitting, in which case you would deny that and say, no, no, we have to look at that in context, in light of what the Israelites believed at the time. So, given that impasse, it seems as if there are no metaphysical truths for you in the Bible. There are only truths about the physical world
Well,
because
no, not necessarily.
okay,
If the So let's bring your correspondence claim in. If
sure.
Genesis 1:3 corresponded to reality, I would be more willing to accept the metaphysical claim that the God of the Bible actually is the one who did that.
I'm sorry, repeat that one more time.
If Genesis 1:3
Yeah.
corresponded
Hmm.
to the real world, right? Where light can happen without the sun, I would I would use my correspondence theory of truth there,
Hmm.
and that would allow me to trust the metaphysical claim that the God of the Bible is the one responsible for it. But because you're making the entire claim metaphysical, I don't
Yeah.
think the entire claim is meant to be metaphysical. I think the
Okay.
entire claim is actually making a claim about correspondence that they did not know wasn't true, but we now do. That messes up the metaphysical truth that I think is supposed to be there, that Israel's God did it.
Hmm. Okay. So now let me ask you a question, Brady, because I guess now, it's funny, because I have like I have all these notes on I had all these verses I was gonna cite. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna explain issue one, issue two. But now because
We
I
spent all this
realize,
time on just on issue one.
yeah, yeah, no, but I think what I got out of this was actually more important, which
Cool.
is we're not going to
Hmm.
agree on the hermeneutics here. But okay, so let me say this, because at the root of our issue is not even a root of, yes, it is a root of the text. Like,
Hmm.
excuse me, it's like the root of the issue is within the text. Like, how do we interpret the text? How do we perceive the text? Yes, that's part of the issue. But the other part of the issue is that we also have different metaphysical beliefs, namely that I believe in God,
Hmm.
you do not. Um, let me segue just for a bit.
Hmm.
When you believed in God,
Hmm.
do you remember why you believed in God?
Yeah, very clearly. I believed in God because the God I encountered in the Bible, in the Old Testament particularly, was a God who claimed to be the maker of heaven and earth
Hmm.
and claimed to be able to tell us things that no human could tell us. How it all
Hmm.
began.
Hmm.
To me, if you're going to flash a divine card, you've got to do something that only the divine can do. And so when I read Genesis and you tell us things that only the one who was there at the beginning could know, you tell us how it all came to be. You say in the beginning you did this and you did this. I wasn't there. I can't. I mean, at the time, as a teenager, I don't know about cosmology. I don't know about you know uh, uh, different fields of science that are diving into these things, astrophysics, and I don't know about all that stuff. I just say, hey, someone's making claims that, as far as I know, I don't even think I thought about whether or not we could verify the claims. I just thought it's a very bold thing to make that claim. And
Hmm.
no human being was there. I believed the Bible first because uh, it made claims that I thought only a God could know, only a God could substantiate. So everything I built on that foundation was on the strength of you flashed the divinity card and nobody can debunk you on it. Come to find out, we actually can. And so it could be it was my fault for taking it literal in the first place. Like maybe if I hadn't taken it so literally, I wouldn't have been so distraught when I realized, oh, this can't be literal. But at the same time, I don't think it's totally my fault because the Bible commends itself to us as trustworthy.
But Brady, I guess let me ask a further question. You say now that there is no God, or that's at least that's your belief that there is no God. Um,
And it's not a belief that there is no God. It's a I don't have a reason to believe there is a God. It's sort of a, you know what I mean?
okay, so it's an agnostic position.
Not agnostic. It's what we call soft atheism. Not I know there is no. I have no reason to believe that there is.
I see. I see the distinction.
Yeah.
I have no reason to believe that there is a God.
I think the explanation that we've been using God to speak to might be something different. And I don't know, but I'm agnostic about what that explanation is. I don't know if we can know that. But in terms of God, I have no reason to believe that that is the right explanation.
Mhm. Um, It's funny. I was just talking about Pascal's wager, like,
Hmm.
like literally 2 days ago, with my class, and I brought up how Pascal would actually agree with you.
Hmm.
Pascal would say there's no way you can prove God exists or not, but you're better off believing in it. But I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't want to go down that route.
Hmm.
Um, because yeah. So okay, so we have differences in this. They're just epistemic differences.
Yeah.
Now let me say one thing. Let me push it just a little more.
Hmm.
Let me push this just a little more. Um, we have, for example, so take the text in Exodus we just read.
Hmm.
I mentioned earlier how Ezekiel builds up on that,
Hmm.
and I was going to mention how Revelation finalizes that kind of, at least in the last book of the Bible. To you, then, is let me say this. Let me say this. Whenever there's a parallel,
Hmm.
I put it that way. Whenever there's a parallel, let's say there's one story, and Ezekiel's like, "Yeah, I saw that thing." Is it
Hmm.
because that the writers are consciously aware of what is has already happened in the
Hmm.
past, and now they're bringing it to light?
Hmm.
Okay.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm saying like I understand this part of your.
Yo, yeah, sure, sure.
What's the other part? Or was there going to be a or on the other
No,
side of
I
that?
was just making the claim that, yeah. So like when Ezekiel builds up on the
Yeah.
earlier vision and the Revelation builds up on the
Is
vision
there
before.
literary dependence? Is basically what you're asking.
Yes.
So let me give you an example. Perfect example, I think. I was a C.S. Lewis fan for many years,
Hmm.
and not just his fiction, but his nonfiction. Mere Christianity was one of my favorite books. Um, Screw Tape Letters. You're familiar with Screw Tape Letters?
Absolutely.
Right. So read that. Went to actually see a play, a one man play of somebody actually acting out the letters.
Oh wow.
Um, but I actually wrote a. I told you about this City of Allegory, the
Hmm.
uh, fiction series that I wrote. And one of the main characters in City of Allegories is a character called Screw Tate. So instead of Screw Tape, it's Screw Tate. And originally it
Okay.
was Screw Tape, but I changed it because I didn't want to get sued. So my guy is Screw Tate. But he's a demonic figure. He's a demonic figure, right?
Yeah.
If you read My City of Allegory, but you also read Screw Tape Letters, you would say, "Yo, this is the same character, even though his name's a little different here. This is the same." Yo, so Screw Tape, his story continues in City of Allegory. Now, if you find this 50 years from now, and you find my book and you find City of Allegory, do you think this is a coincidence? Do you think this is divine? Or do you think
Mhm.
this is clearly literary dependence? I'm saying I think it's clear that what you see in the Bible is literary dependence.
Mhm. Okay.
Just for the same reason, when you read the Apocrypha and you see Book of Enoch, right? Most Christians do not grant the Book of Enoch canonical status. But why not be just as dogmatic about, hey, in the same way that Revelation ties into Genesis and therefore it's of one divine author, why not say the same thing about the Book of Enoch? Using the same characters, using the same themes, talking about the flood. Why would we be so willing to say the Book of Enoch is literary dependence and not divine, but
Mhm.
Genesis or Second Peter, which does the same thing as the Book of Enoch does, those are not literary dependence. That's God continuing the story. To me, it's all the same.
Can I propose a riddle to you?
Sure.
Okay. This is gonna be interesting. I want to see what you say about this. Um, let's go to the book of Acts really fast. Yeah, I'd want to have you read it.
I was
And let me
hoping you
know how
weren't
much.
about to say out of the eater something to eat, out of
No,
the
no,
sour
no,
something
no.
sweet.
No, oh, that'd be funny. Uh, if you can read Acts 2:41 for me.
Then they gladly received his word. Oh, then they that gladly received his word were baptized, and the same day were added unto them about 3,000 souls.
Yes. So the new covenant.
Mhm.
New covenant comes in, 3,000 get saved. Now go back to Exodus chapter 32, 28. Now this is to put it in context. Um
You said Exodus? I'm sorry, what chapter?
Chapter 32,
Okay.
verse 28. And this is when Israel, when Moses is up on the mount, the
Mhm.
Israelites worship the golden calf,
Mhm.
and the Lord tells Moses, hey, go back down because the people are worshiping a calf. They destroy it, and Moses confronts Aaron about the calf. Well, yeah, I guess it would make more sense if you maybe started at verse 25. I guess maybe that would help.
25 down to where? To the end of the chapter?
Just to 28, 25 to 28.
Okay. And when Moses saw that the people were naked, for Aaron had made them naked unto their shame among their enemies, then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. And all the sons of Levi gathered together unto him. And he said to them, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, put every man his sword by his side and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp and slay every man his brother and every man his companion and every man his neighbor. And the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men.
Yes. So the original, the original um stone tablets, the old covenant, Moses breaks the tables and 3,000 die. The new covenant, 3,000 are saved. Literary dependence or coincidence?
Before I respond to either of those, I think it's, to be honest, it's a little sickening.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
E-
didn't mean to.
No, no, no. It's
Oh, are you saying like my riddle is sickening, or you mean
no, no,
like
no,
the
not your
text?
riddle. Just the whether you want to put this on Moses or on God,
Oh, sure,
that I'm
sure.
going to kill 3,000 people for whatever. The idea of a God overseeing or countenancing that is so
Yeah,
funny. I
I see what you're
became,
saying.
yeah, I became so much more sensitive to certain things after deconverting. Whereas before, I would look at that and like, I would actually praise God for that before. Like, look at the
Mm,
justice of God,
mm.
dealing with man's sinfulness. I think maybe I'm more sickened by me, by a former me that used to look at that and cheer for Moses, God's man,
Okay.
commanding that to happen. Anyway, you said coincidence or literary dependence, or the third option for you is no, this is divine, right? Um, I'm not prepared to say. It could be either. It could be, if it's literary dependence, that's just great writing. That's just what good writers do. Um, or if it's a coincidence, to me, it's not divine. So if it's not divine and it's not a big sticking point, to me, I look to see literary dependence when it shifts a storyline. And I guess you can see how that's shifting a storyline from old to new covenant there. Um,
The
maybe
reason I
maybe it's good literary dependence. I don't know.
the reason I brought this up is because I remember when I first, for some reason, if I
Mhm,
could tell you the truth, when I first went through the Bible and I was reading that story in Acts, I'm like, why does this sound familiar to me?
mhm.
But I couldn't put it in my head. I'm like, this is familiar. I can't remember where. It wasn't until the second time that I read through the Bible, when I was reading this passage again, that I'm like, wait a sec, and it clicked. And I thought to myself, well, because I believe in the divinity of the text, I
Mhm,
thought to myself, I see now the
mhm,
superiority on one example of the
mhm,
superiority of the new covenant versus the old covenant. Um, but I also thought to myself, I don't think that the writers were aware. That was my initial thought
mhm.
because that to me is a very specific. It's a very specific number, and it's just a very specific. How can I say? I don't. It's just a bit odd the way. I don't know. It's just. I guess it's just intuition. I guess it's just intuition.
No, I mean,
Uh,
I get it. I could see how that would thrill a Bible believer to see God was up to something, even if the authors didn't know. I get it.
but yeah, I just think that there's a lot of weird coincidences like that. But let me say, I guess one last thing,
Mm.
and then I'll maybe see what else. If you want to mention anything else, we can. What would convince you that there is a God, that He knows you?
God.
Only God Himself.
Yeah, I mean,
Like you. Do you mean to say? Do you mean to say that God Himself would have to show up in front of you and say, "Brady, here I am. I'm real. I exist."
well, once again, I'll go to the same point that I think we got to towards the end of our last one. Even that, if God were to do that and then vanish, I have no idea whether or not that was me hallucinating. I don't. In order for me to deal with a God would have to just be part of the world, part of my experience. If God is not going to be part of my experience, I don't know why I'm wasting time dealing with a God, dealing with the concept of God.
But my question is, if He was a part of this world, though, wouldn't that make Him one of us?
So, not necessarily one of us. Like dogs are part of our world. They're not one of us.
Yeah, but I
Aliens
don't
could
mean.
become part of our world. What I mean is part of my experience.
Yeah, I wasn't specific. That was my fault. I wasn't specific enough. I,
Mm.
I guess what I mean by one of us is in the
Natural,
philosophical.
basically.
Yeah, in like a philosophical sense, contingent. He would be created by something else
Not
having come into
necessarily.
this world.
Not necessarily. Um, in the same way that God manifested and localized himself to appear to Abram in the theophany, right? Um, or in the same way that God supposedly incarnated and placed himself in Jesus, like what would the impact of Christianity's message be if rather than ascend to heaven after the resurrection, like all other dying and rising gods did, right? And all the apotheosis, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um, apotheoses, all the other people in history that lived and died, or at least were rumored, even if they were mythical, they died and then they were raised. They never stick around on earth. They're always seen by a few witnesses, and then so no one can ever verify that they really were raised. You have stories about the witnesses that saw them, but they don't. What if Jesus raised and rather than ascending where no one could trace him, stuck around? And generation after generation, there was this ageless being that had wounds in his wrist and in his side. And we had, paintings from the 1300s and videos from 1960 that this was the same dude. He never ages and he never dies and he still got the fresh wounds. Like, be a part of the world. You don't have to be other to be a part of the world and present to confirm, as opposed to having people just believe stories that are now 2,000 years old. For me, it would take God being a part of the world and not a part of his creation. I just mean a part of our experience. And if God is not a part of our experience, I really don't know why I'm spending time. I
Could
don't
you
mind
give
spending
me?
time talking about God, but I don't know why
Yeah.
I would spend time trying to live in light of a God.
Could you give me an example? Yeah, like a concrete example being part of our experience.
Like I said, a Jesus
Yeah.
who's resurrected bodily
Hmm.
and remains, that everyone has to contend with because he's still here and he's not aging and he's not dying. And my great grandfather knew Jesus. And it's great, and he's still here. And then the charge of not following him would make sense. But right now, the charge of not following him doesn't make sense because how do I even know you existed? You're going to damn me to hell because I don't believe you. Why would I believe in you? All I have is the words of people from centuries ago. If you want to if you want to challenge or charge me with not believing you or not following you, present me with you. Not words of you, not testimony. Make the charge stick that I actually could have followed you because you were right here and I didn't. I didn't believe in you, but you were right here and I should have because look at what you like. Don't convict me for things that for not believing stories.
Let me ask you a question, a general question, I guess, about history.
Mhm.
Do you think that history testimony is uh let me put it this way. Is history trustworthy? If a historian leaves us his accounts, what do you believe what
Mm.
is written about history, or do you say we can't really know anything about history? We just have to take
Well, I
people's
don't think
word.
we can know anything for certainty about history unless we're talking about, archaeological data. Like, is the pillar that's standing in this country in Egypt? If the pillar is standing and we can trace how long it's been standing there, we can assume something happened to get that pillar to rise the way it is. The stories about what happened, we can't know for certain. The stories about why the pillar is standing, but I think we have to go through a process um, to determine how much validity or how much stock we're going to put in certain stories. And so stories are believable when they have they're more believable when they have contemporary attestation. They're even
Hmm.
more believable when they have contemporary attestation from adversaries. And the truth is probably somewhere between the story from one group and the story from their adversaries because they're
Hmm.
both biased in different positions. So I
Hmm.
think you have contemporary attestation, you have archaeological attestation, and then I think you have just um, plausibility. How plausible is it that that happened? The more implausible it is, or the more extraordinary the story, the higher the evidence for that story needs to be. So there's a saying, skeptics like to say, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence.
Hmm.
So when you look at history, if you're not making an extraordinary claim, like if you tell me you just bought a meal, I have no reason not to believe you.
Hmm.
If you just tell me that you just bought a restaurant, that's a more extraordinary claim. I'm going to need a little more evidence, right?
Hmm.
You tell me you bought a country, I need extraordinary evidence for that. You
Yeah.
tell me you bought a car, I'm like, okay, I don't have any reason not to believe you. And your claim is not making any real demands of me. So whether I believe you or not, it's no real skin off my back. So I may just believe you because it's of no consequence to me.
But in
So
all these cases, though, sorry
yeah,
to interrupt you, but in all these cases, like you can ask me, like, where
right,
is your
right,
proof? But in
right,
the case of a historian who's long gone,
right. Henry Ford made the first car, right? That claim. I don't know that to be true.
okay, but you think it's highly probable that he did?
It's plausible, first of all. It becomes more probable the more there's contemporary attestation, right? So you
Yeah.
have other people from that time, his enemies who were trying to make cars, say he made the car first. It becomes more probable, even though it was plausible, just because it's not an extraordinary claim. People can make cars. We see them today. So it's plausible. It becomes more probable when there's contemporary attestation. And then especially when there's archaeology, you have the Ford plant in Detroit. And you know how long that's been there because you can look at city planning models and um, I don't think you can know for certainty what happened in history, but things become more plausible and more probable the more attestation, the more evidence you have around them. And the less extraordinary the claim is, the more plausible, the more probable it is.
Okay,
That's how I do historiography.
that's consistent. No, that's consistent.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, that's consistent. Okay. So how about this? Next time we meet up, then, did you want to do
Do you
the
think you have
dome?
more meat to add on Dome in the Sky and
But
Genesis 1 and
believe me,
2?
I had a whole thing ready, but it's
Okay, well, let's
just
do another session on that, and then that'll give you more time to get up on chapters 4 and 5 on evolution.
okay. So how about this? Um, I could, yeah, because I was going to kind of explain that the dome in the sky and Genesis 1 and 2, I guess, the whole, conflict between the two accounts.
Mhm,
I have an explanation for that. I have an explanation for all the issues, but again, they rely on
mhm.
using the Bible as a whole.
Yeah,
I can't get away from that.
let's do those next time, and then we'll
Sure, and then
save,
read 4 and 5.
yeah, 4 and 5 for the time after that.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Cool, man. Hey, good chopping it up with you, man. Thanks for
Yeah,
putting in
yeah,
the time and energy to the book. I appreciate that.
for sure, man. It's a good book. No, it's a good book. I can see all the issues that you have, so it's
Mm,
very clear. It's very good
good
writing,
stuff.
man. Very good writing.
Appreciate that, man. Appreciate it. I
Yeah,
look
yeah.
forward to next time, man. We can
Sounds good.
DM to plan when we're gonna do it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, get with you, man.
All right, take care.
All right, peace.